Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast, where quite simply, we're on a mission to help you live longer by preventing health complications before they start. Every year, there are millions of cases of brain hemorrhage, but there really doesn't have to be. And at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we're committed to ensuring that those that don't have to happen don't. In this podcast, you will learn more about brain hemorrhages, their causes, how to prevent them, and so much more. Expect honest, straightforward conversations that will give you the information you need to take back control of your own health and potentially prevent the preventable. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, on today's episode, we have Miles Powell, who unfortunately lost his mum to a brain hemorrhage back in 2011. Miles will share more of his story, what happened to his mum, how he dealt with her sudden passing, and how he overcame his grief. He will share little tips that will hopefully help you if you have also lost somebody to a brain hemorrhage and you're struggling to navigate your grief. These episodes, which are so incredibly raw and honest, are so powerful. And I have no doubt that if you are struggling, having lost somebody to a brain hemorrhage, that this will be so immensely helpful for you too. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast. I think it's really interesting to have this conversation from somebody else. Obviously, we've been through very similar experiences, I guess. But obviously no two experiences are the same. Yeah. I actually have recorded a podcast this morning with a lady who've had a brain hemorrhage. Wow. So it's really interesting to hear the different perspectives within one situation. And we'll go into, what's happened to you, your family, your mum in particular, how that affected you and how it changed the course of your life. Because I think it's really important for people who are listening to this and maybe have no idea about brain hemorrhages to really understand the knock-on effect it has to people. And I think, one woman described it as a wake of destruction, and it really does. It cuts through lives. And ultimately, our role as a charity is to stop that from happening. We hope that by sharing more awareness about brain hemorrhages, the signs of them, how do we prevent them, and helping us increase the fundraising to better treat them, all of this work that we're doing, I think we can stop more of these stories from happening. So I think it's really important to be sharing these real life stories. So firstly, thank you. On the 20th of May, in what year was it again? 2011, you had a phone call from your dad saying your mum had been rushed into hospital. Remember my dad ringing me saying the same thing, basically. And there was a lot of confusion about what actually happened to your mum. Obviously, it transpired she'd had a brain hemorrhage, and there was, the trauma of the next few hours, and obviously then the days and the weeks after it has really changed the course of your life. And we'll come on to that. What I firstly want to understand is, what was your mum like?
Yeah. Well, thank you first for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be here. So my mum, Jo Powell. So I've run out of words to kind of describe her really over the last couple of years. But in essence, she came from a working class background, born in Leigh, near Wigan. Moved down to London for university to study law, where she met my dad. Stayed down there for a few years. Moved to Brighton and had me. And then went back up north to her roots with my dad in tow and had my sisters, Naomi and Rebecca. So she was a legal prosecutor by trade. She worked for the CPS for many, many years. Until when I was about 15, she had breast cancer, unfortunately, which was very traumatic for the family, as you can appreciate. Resulted in double mastectomy, chemotherapy, all of those things that happened. And then after that, fortunately for us and as a family, she recovered from that fully into remission, but decided to follow her passion, which was the English language, reading, writing, etc. So she already had a couple of degrees, obviously through being a prosecutor. She had two at the time, and she set herself about doing a PhD in the English language and creative writing, which she did whilst recovering, I guess, from cancer. She actually ended up with 6 degrees, which is unbelievable considering I don't have one. Much to the annoyance of my sisters who've gone on as well to get degrees. But yeah, she threw herself into that essentially, became a published author, went into teaching, you know, at university at Salford and also at Edge Hill as well. And just loved to write and read as well. She was an avid reader. She would read 3 or 4 books at a time, so highly intelligent. But on the side of being my mum, an amazing mother, fiercely passionate about her children, you know, our futures, protecting us, as every mother, I suppose, does. Funny, lots of friends, you know, and just very passionate about life. And she was really the matriarch of our family. She was like, I always describe her as the kind of the north in our compass. And that's even more why it was so devastating, obviously, when that was taken away. But yeah, she was very popular, lots of friends. So yeah, it was a very big hole that she left in our lives when she left.
She sounded like an absolute powerhouse of a woman.
Was. And she loved a wine as well, I must say that.
Well, it's all about balance, though, isn't it?
She loved a party. She's always a life and soul. So
yeah, sounds like she achieved a lot
Yeah.
and also went through a lot as well.
No, she
you know,
did.
having had breast cancer as well and having to go through the treatment, and that's not in any way easy at all.
No.
But obviously, as you say, she did survive. You guys survived. I'm sure that made you stronger as a unit.
Absolutely, yeah.
And probably also, and I'm going to put this in a way that might sound bizarre, probably also made you appreciate things in a sense of appreciated the fragility of life, appreciated how things can change in a moment. And I think so often people, they don't get that realization until something traumatic happens when they lose somebody.
Yeah, of course.
So I think that's a really, you know, we can look at things in different ways. We can put positive spins on it, but I hope that you kind of had that.
Yeah. I think at the time we thought, you know, that devastating part of our lives was over with. You know, there was a big gap between her passing away, obviously, and having cancer. But you know, having seen her battle through that and change her life and go into this thing she was so passionate about and be successful, you know, we were very proud of her. It did change the family, but to your point, it did pull us closer together. You know, and we did reflect on that as a family at times to say, you know, we were very fortunate to have gone through that experience and come out of it with some positives. And you know, we were looking forward to, you know, seeing her, you know, grow up to be a grandmother and share all those new experiences that would have been in the next chapter of her life. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be.
So she never met any other grandchildren?
No, I can touch on that later. But no, close. A couple of months really before a grandson would have been born.
Yeah. So let's move on then to that day when you got that phone call from your dad. Where were you? What were you doing? What did he say to you?
I was at home. I was getting ready to go out with my wife Adele. She was 6 months pregnant at the time. I got a phone call from my dad, which I thought was strange. My mum was actually due to go on holiday, so she was at a friend's house, a very close family friend. I knew from the moment he rang that something wasn't right because it was kind of I wasn't expecting a call, etc. And he basically said that your mum was on the way to hospital, being rushed into hospital with a suspected heart attack. And when those words come out, you don't really know how to react, what to do. Your body just goes into kind of panic. And you know, my first thought was I need to get to the hospital. And my dad lived, my sister lived a lot further away than I did to the hospital that she was at, which was Bolton. I got in the car straight away with Adele and made our way down there. About 30 minutes later, I arrived. Burst through the A&E doors, and there was already somebody waiting at reception for me. They took me into a little side room and explained that my mum had an expected bleed on the brain, which, you know, again was shocking because that wasn't the information that I'd been told. And they essentially said, you know, there's going to be some tests that we're going to run. We don't know how severe it is at the moment, but your mum is in a really critical condition. And then, you know, they explained, you know, what the, I guess, worst case outcomes could possibly be, potentially involving flying her to Manchester to have an operation. And then my dad arrived with my sisters, and one of my sisters, I had to explain as best I could what was happening. And then, you know, half an hour later, we sat back down with a consultant who said, you know, unfortunately, your mum's brain hemorrhage isn't operable. And essentially, she was on palliative care now. So
Which I imagine is incredibly difficult. And having been in that situation yourself, when they're still alive, but they're not, you know they're not going to survive, is one of the most. It's like this no man's land that it's so immensely painful that it's quite hard to put
you kind of
words.
You're in desperation mode at that time. You know, you kind of hoping for a miracle, let's say. And I remember saying one of the consultants when we were in the room. You know, I begged him to save my mum's life. And, you know, he kind of looked at me. You could tell he was wondering how to answer it.
Yeah.
You know, and you think these people have to go through this every day.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know how they do it, to be honest. So,
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so many emotions. There's anger, there's doubt, there's fear, there's, questions.
It's, so, yeah, you know, we were fortunate enough, I suppose, in a way to spend some time with her as a family, and some of Mum's closest friends, you know, came up to the hospital to see us as well. You know, making those phone calls was very difficult. You know, my father and myself doing that. And then one of my sisters, Naomi, was actually on holiday with her friends at the time. So my dad had to call her and explain, you know, and there's little parts of these memories that stick in your head. And one of them was just hearing her sort of screaming, you know, in desperation on the end of the phone. And then trying to get home. You know, she was 23 at the time. You know, you're still young. You don't expect to get those phone calls when you're on holiday. Fortunately, we did manage to get her back. And it was, I think one of the things that sticks in my mind is was the evening of when that happened. And obviously we stayed at the hospital, and you just walk about. There's nothing you can really do. And, you know, I'm not a religious person, but I walked past this chapel that was there and just kind of went in, and I was on my own and just, you know, prayed for a miracle, basically. Unfortunately, you know, that wasn't to be. So the next day, they ran a load of tests on my mum and basically said, you know, they had the legal power now to sort of end her life. And after that, that was I guess the start of the devastation that was to follow. Because at that moment, you're kind of in a bubble in a hospital. Yeah. You know, your mum's still there physically. So you're always just hoping that she would just wake up.
Yeah,
you know.
There's still hope.
There's still hope, yeah, exactly. And they kind of, they try and explain that to you in the hospital, that there isn't hope. But, you know, your brain's a strange thing. It always clings onto it. So, and then, the following day we had the opportunity to say goodbye. And as you talk about grief and the trauma afterwards, you know, things that you look back on, I think one of my things was guilt, and that I didn't stay with her when they turned the life support machines off. I just couldn't bring myself to do it, and that was really hard for me afterwards, because I felt like I should have done that. You know, despite the fact I know Mum wouldn't have wanted me to do that. But I just remember going home. You know, you don't sleep, and then you get a phone call to say that, you know, she's passed away. So yeah.
I don't believe there's any necessarily right or wrong way of dealing with that. I think we all have to do what's best for us. And, you know, I think if that's the way that you needed to do it, then that's the way you needed to do it. It's so interesting when you talk, and I think when we get sent in a lot of real life stories, and there's so many synergies between a lot of them. You know, the way people, the questions, the thoughts, you know, everything, the way that the doctor comes in and explains certain things. But one really bizarrely strange thing that you just said is about the church, or the chapel. Because I did exactly the same thing when Natalie was in hospital. And same, I am not religious at all. Probably arguably was when I was younger, because we were brought up in like a Christian-esque traditional family. And there was this church, I remember sitting there being like pleading, like, please don't let her die. And I think it's to your point of like, it's just clinging on to whatever you can cling on to, hope, religion, whatever, to the idea that this isn't over yet. But like, there's got to be something that can, you know, you hear about these miracle stories. Let this be one of those miracle stories. And we'll come on to, you know, what you just mentioned around, you know, saying goodbye, I guess. I'm intrigued. So obviously she was taken into hospital with a suspected heart attack. And then obviously they realised it was a brain hemorrhage. I'm intrigued because when I say I spoke to a lady earlier who had a brain hemorrhage, again, she went in and they didn't know that she'd had a brain hemorrhage until she had an MRI. And you'll hear that with a lot of people. We had a real life story sent in by a lady whose 4-year-old child had a brain hemorrhage. And obviously because she was so young, they did not expect it. And I think there's a big piece here around we need paramedics or, you know, or even just people, you know, the general public to be aware of the signs and symptoms of potentially having a brain hemorrhage. But at what point was there a realization that actually it wasn't that and it shifted?
Well, the lady that my we called her Auntie Ruth, but my mum's childhood friend that she was at her house was a nurse by trade, and she'd worked in the NHS 111 service for many, many years. And she actually told the paramedic that she thought it was a brain hemorrhage.
Okay.
So my mum stood up to go to the toilet. She said she had a really bad headache, couldn't see all of a sudden, then she collapsed. But that resulted in cardiac arrest, which is what they expect. They thought it was a heart attack. When they came, my auntie, thankfully, was trained in CPR, so she was delivering that. Probably kept her alive, actually, long enough to come to hospital, so we'll always be grateful for doing that as well.
So the brain hemorrhage triggered the cardiac arrest?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly that, yeah. And I think it was such a substantial bleed that's why it was so traumatic. And I know, it was a subarach brain hemorrhage that my mum had, and some people do survive those, with lots of different devastating effects, as we're all aware. But they are survivable. But unfortunately, in my mum's case, it was too substantial. So they got to the hospital, and it was my auntie Ruth who was informing them that she thought this was the case because of the way it presented at the time, which then led them to doing the CT scans and the MRIs, etc., to confirm it essentially. Yeah.
So it was in hospital, as you mentioned. Then you had to say goodbye.
Yeah.
What about that first week? Did you really understand what had happened? Because I think if I relate this back to my experience, there's an awful lot of terms that get thrown around that I've never heard of before.
Exactly.
You kind of understand there's a bleed on the brain. That's not a good thing. Yeah. But like aneurysms or AVMs or, even subarachnoid, what do these terms mean? And I think when you're lacking understanding, it adds to that confusion, which then adds to the grief, it adds to the trauma as well. Talk me through that sort of first week.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, neurology is an incredibly complex area. The brain's incredibly complex, right? Trying to explain that to someone who's in shock is difficult anyway. And, as the dust had settled, even after the first day or so, you try and then understand a little bit more. There's no leaflets that are given to you. I don't blame the doctors or the NHS because the level of care my mum got was outstanding. The ICU nurses were all in tears, and I don't know how they do that job every day. So I'll always say she received fantastic care. That might not be the case for everyone, and I understand that, but in our case, we were fortunate. You kind of sitting around thinking, well, what's happened? It's like your mum's just disappeared, and there's no explanation. I don't try and compare, different illnesses to a brain hemorrhage, because everyone who loses someone, it's devastating. But I think facts help you to understand and process through time as to why things have happened, what was the cause of it, could it have been prevented. The result is the result, but sometimes those little pieces can help you understand why this happened, and that just wasn't there. So, the week after mum passing was mainly in autopilot mode. Right, we need to plan a funeral. Never expected to have to do that. I need to ring all the people that she knew, and experience that shock every time you rang someone, because she wasn't ill. She wasn't poorly. She was on holiday. A lot of her friends knew that. And to ring them and say she's passed away, they didn't believe you. So having to relive that was incredibly traumatic, as well as support my sisters. And then from a personal perspective, my wife was 6 months pregnant with our first child at the time. It was very conflicting for me as well, because I wanted to be there to make sure she was okay, but I wasn't capable, I suppose, at that time of doing that emotionally. I'm very grateful for Adele and everything that she did in that time to support me through it, because it must have been very difficult. So it was, you just in a bit of a haze all the time. It's horrible.
You remind me so much of my brother, because he is the oldest child. He took on, obviously my parents had lost a child, and whilst they could kind of go through the process of planning a funeral, I think he felt like I needed to really step up and support. And he did, we had family company, so he would then trying to manage that and make sure, it didn't fall apart, because everyone was just, didn't know where they were. His wife was also pregnant as when Natalie died as well. And, there was lots of things that I felt like he was kind of running between. Probably didn't recognise that at the time, but looking back, I certainly do. And I think when you layer on top of the grief that's already there with this sense of self-responsibility, it's so immensely difficult. And this is where I think grief is complicated, because it's not just someone dies and here are the steps that you need to take. You know, there's plenty of charts and process things and whatnot, and it'd be wonderful if it was that straightforward, because it'd be a lot easier to get through. But there are a lot of nuances that contribute to it. And to your point as well around the trauma, you know, there's different types of grief. And I don't know the terms, but in terms of somebody losing, or maybe someone's ill and they're ill for an awfully long time, you kind of already have, you're grieving them, but they haven't died yet. But this is very, very traumatic. And to your point about ringing, your mum's friends as well, it's incredibly shocking. And I think there's a huge thing about getting through the shock before you can even process grief in the first place. So once you've moved through that shock, well, how long, I guess, did that take? And then what did grieving kind of look like for you?
I mean, the shock, I'd say it was years, really, But I guess the initial shock, was a couple of weeks. You get the funeral planned, you have that, and then that's it. You're kind of left to kind of get on with it, I suppose. I think we'll touch on later on the support, for people who've been a part of this. But for me, it was difficult in that, was people going to forget my mum, who they were, her friends, family, people she worked with, all those types of things. So I found that really difficult because people move on with their lives, right? Because they're not her son or her husband, etc.
And they also go through their own things.
They do, yeah, exactly, yeah. I think I didn't grieve to begin with. I think I wanted to be strong for my sisters, in particular, and my wife.
How old were they when this happened?
Rebecca was 19 and Naomi was 23. Okay. So very young. I was 25. So not much older. But you feel older in that situation.
Yeah.
You feel...
I mean, there is a big difference between, I guess, 19 and 25, though, isn't there?
Yeah,
anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Rebecca was, still a child, essentially. To not have to then, go through a lot of the milestones in life. All of us are the same. We've gone through every major milestone without a mum. Weddings, christenings. She would have had 6 grandchildren now. All of these things are constant reminders of things that you've lost. We'll talk about later, I'm sure, around how we move forward with those things. But back to your point around how grief was for me. Anxiety was the biggest challenge for me. I developed an anxiety disorder. The brain is a very complicated thing, and it can play tricks on you. It can make you feel things physically and emotionally that you don't expect through grief. Right up to, I was then convinced that, it would happen to me.
Yeah. Health anxiety.
Yeah, massively. Yeah. I'd spend hours Googling things on the phone. Yep. Not healthy. Until I decided that I was going to be okay. To the point where I actually ended up seeing a neurologist myself. Because I had a headache for, 3 months maybe, on and off. But it was stress, tension. But actually sitting with the neurologist was probably a blessing. I'm sure it's a bit of a waste of his time in essence, but he actually explained a lot about brain hemorrhages to me, which having those facts helped me to process it a little bit more, not just for my own sake, but for my sisters, and starting to understand, well, what can we do to prevent these? Is there something you can do to take some control back of the situation? And the answer to that was not really. I were involved very briefly with Headway, who obviously do mainly a stroke charity, but they also do other things. But just wasn't as I couldn't connect to it as much, as with yourselves and KMT now, which I came across by complete chance as well.
You were Googling, weren't you?
Yeah, it just came up. It's crazy. So yeah, it took me years. I had lots of different therapies, counselling, but none of it really clicked. I don't know why. I think it's when your body's ready and your mind is ready. Yeah, it will happen. A
huge thank you to Colony Coworking for supporting us with this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast, and for providing us with this beautiful studio too. Now, at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we are a small team working remotely, but on a mission to make a big difference. But finding the balance between flexible working and working in inspiring spaces surrounded by inspiring people can be a hard balance to strike sometimes. Colony is an expanding network of co-working spaces in Manchester, a place for entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers, startups, and established businesses. A place where everyone comes together, where ideas pollinate and businesses flourish. And Colony is helping NKMT do just that by supporting us with this podcast, by helping us reach more people with this vital message, and ultimately helping us to prevent the preventable. To find out more about how Colony can help your business grow, head to the show notes now. So obviously we've spoken around how you were struggling and, you know, dealing with anxieties and worries and, you know, health anxieties and whatnot. Yeah. How did you deal with those? I know you said you obviously went to see a neurologist and whatnot, but is there anything practically that you did to support yourself?
Yeah, I guess the main breakthrough for me was discovered running. I'd exercised on and off through my life. Obviously, when you're younger, you do generally. And I don't know how I got round to doing it. I just decided one day to go for a run, and then I've not looked back since, really. The feeling you get when you've been for a run or any form of exercise, whether it's walking, etc., it just changed my whole life, really. Made me feel relaxed. The tension was kind of gone from my body, and it gave you a sense of achievement as well. You'd done something for the day, which was amazing. So that was the kind of thing that I built on over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I would say. But it took a long time to get to the point of finding something or being able to have that strength to say, right, I'm going to try and do something now, take control back. You know, I was on different tablets, things like that, which, you know, it works for some people, but for me, it just wasn't the answer. So yeah, I'm grateful for being able to be healthy enough to do that, and it's something that now forms part of my life. It's like a non-negotiable for me. Yeah,
and I mean that's one major thing that you did for us was run the Manchester Marathon as well. Is there anything else that you did that you feel potentially could help somebody else if they're kind of going through something similar that help you navigate the trauma, the anxieties, the grief?
I think the main thing for me is don't be ashamed of it. I spent a long time being ashamed of how I felt because I had a perception that, you know, 12 months after losing my mum, that people would just expect me to get on with it, you know, back to normal because you're in work, you're back to your daily routines. But I struggled with that a lot. So I would say talk about it because even people that don't necessarily understand about a brain hemorrhage or even that they've not lost anybody, having someone just to listen that you can trust, even if they don't speak, just to listen makes a huge difference. But it does take courage to do that, and sometimes it's hard because some of those emotions that you feel, it's hard to put them into words. I struggled with that. You can become sort of emotionally devoid a little bit, and that's like a layer of protection that you put over yourself. Again, something that I struggled with as well. Read, educate yourself. Just do something that you find enjoyment in, whatever that might be, whether it's reading, playing music, walking, going out with your friends. Just don't isolate yourself because you won't move forward. And it is really, really hard to break that cycle because you're kind of protecting yourself. And it's part of the trauma response when you read into these things, which I have done a lot of. You know, I'm not a psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to understand why I was feeling the way I was. Was there any quick answers? And there isn't, but there's a lot of answers out there that you can piece together and find the right combination for yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I used to call it like a toolbox. I used to do coaching.
Absolutely.
And, you know, whether it is a walk or a run or exercise or whether it is talking to somebody or reading or whatever it may be, but having that toolbox that you don't have to do everything all in one go, but just when you know you need something, it's like looking at that toolbox, like what can I do today? And it could be the smallest thing, but like what can I do today? And you'd hope that even if it is the smallest step, that step today becomes 2 steps tomorrow, and it builds from there. But it's difficult.
It is. And, you know, you start to understand things that trigger your mood. You know, we live in a country, unfortunately, where it rains most of the time. And I find...
Don't talk to me about that.
I find, personally, being in the sunshine for me was such a difference. So, but just being out in the fresh air, you know, rather than being inside all the time. COVID was difficult, obviously, for a lot of people. Not being able to do that, I found that really hard as well, as many people did. But yeah, it's just finding those things and try things. You know, you might find something that you never thought you'd enjoy, but actually it's such a relief. You know, I know people that have struggled with anxiety and depression for different reasons that have tried things like painting, drawing, things they'd never ever think to do, but they've found great enjoyment out of it because it concentrates their mind on something else.
Yeah, 100%. My boyfriend was very ill for a long time, and I literally tried everything to make myself feel like anything that I felt like might calm me, whether it was a massage or acupuncture or like some energy thing or Reiki. I did not care. I had no shame in being like, I'm just going to try it because I think it's important to want to try different things because you never know. I did not think acupuncture would remotely help me, and I just tried it because a friend said, and I carried on doing it for about 3 years, maybe, most weeks, because it was the one thing that really calmed me down. And so I think, to your point, I think it's really important to be open-minded and just give something a go. If you go and you really don't like it, that does not matter. No, just you've given it a go. No. And I think that's the most important thing. And being open-minded about what you hear as well, you know, and taking it with a pinch of salt. Like, people do have different experiences, different beliefs, different perspectives, but being open-minded to their perspectives and how it could potentially help you too.
And I think, you know, a lot of the time people want to help. You know, in your close circle, if you're fortunate enough to have, you know, groups of friends and other family members, people do want to help, but sometimes they don't know how, and they're probably a little bit wary of asking you, would you like to do this, or how are you feeling, because they don't know whether that will trigger you in some way. So sometimes they just leave you to it. So you do have to kind of stand up and say, I do need help, and I want to change my mindset. I want to get through this. And the big thing for me is, don't feel guilty about wanting to do that, because there is no shame in wanting to move past your grief at all. You can't live your rest of your life feeling like that. Yeah. So that's one thing I would say. Yeah,
100%. Shame is a really bizarre emotion. But I think recognizing there's no shame in supporting yourself, as you say, is really important. Yeah. How did your family cope as a unit? You said that when your mum had breast cancer, it brought your family in a way closer. Yeah. And it really helped you. Yeah, it really helped you as a unit. Yeah. How did you all navigate then the loss of your mum? Did you all deal with it differently? Did you deal with it together? What did that look like?
This is a real mixed bag, really. I think the first thing I would say is that it completely destroyed our family dynamic, pretty much overnight, really, because I think we all went in our different journeys with grief. You know, like I said, I took the approach of the kind of stoic, be quiet, just get on with it, hopefully things will pass, try and support the family, etc. One of my sisters, Naomi, was a little more extrovert, I suppose, in terms of how she dealt with grief. She wanted to get things done, talk about stuff all the time, you know, go through memories of mum, share stories, and I found that quite difficult. And Rebecca was probably somewhere in between, so sometimes she would do that, sometimes she'd be quiet. And I think for my dad in particular, was very difficult for him. And, you know, this is me being brutally honest, I think it took me personally a while to understand his reaction to things, because you don't put yourself in the perspective of he's lost his wife. You put your perspective in, I've lost my mum. Do you know what I mean? And you expect your dad to be that person that's going to make everything better. And, you know, there was, I guess, some difficult times for us in our relationship to kind of move past that. You know, and my dad's moved to Dubai, and he's been there for, I think, 9 years now, to try and, I guess, move past. There's too many memories for him here. So he's a different person to what he was, and he'd openly admit that. He's not met anybody else, not that we'd have a problem with that. And, you know, we still love him as a dad, obviously. And, you know, my sisters are different people as well. But what I would say is we've still remained incredibly close as a family. If anybody ever needs anything, you know, my dad would fly home immediately if that was the case. And, you know, we've helped each other bring our kids up, supported each other through different times in grief. I think that's one thing I would say, is that nobody's journey is the same. You know, you could be, I guess, having a good week and then someone's having a bad week. And it's being able to navigate through a lot of that. I think particularly in the last 4 years, we've kind of been a lot more open about how we feel, and started to kind of talk through things more rationally, which you get with time. You know, it's 13 years now, which is crazy to say, but it is. So I think as you get more emotionally mature as well, you start to be able to process these things better.
A huge thank you to Hugh James Solicitors for sponsoring this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, having your life torn apart by a brain hemorrhage is one thing, but learning that it could have been prevented and it was due to a mistake in your medical treatment is truly devastating. And whilst nothing can change what has happened, Hugh James's clinical negligence team can support those who have suffered a brain injury or bereavement due to a mistake in their treatment. To find out more about how and if they can support you, head to our show notes now. Do you think if we had better skills at that sort of communication or taught those skills when we're younger, that when we're faced with difficult circumstances, we're able to express ourselves better?
Yeah, definitely. I think being male as well, I think sometimes there's a lot of stigma around males' mental health. I think that's quite well documented at the moment. And it is true, I think you become very introverted with it. And I struggled very much to express emotion. You know, I still have that challenge now. I think there's a defense barrier you put up to protect yourself from grief, from loss, etc. But I think, having some guides as to how to talk, how to start talking, because that was often my challenge, and my sister sometimes, is how do we open that conversation to say, I'm struggling with this because of this, what's happened to me. And it's difficult to do that. Once you do start doing it, it's easy. You know, I'm sat here today having a conversation with you. I could have done this 10, even 5 years ago. No, definitely not. So it does take time to do that. But yeah, anything that could be done to support people in that would be beneficial.
It's a skill though, isn't it, right?
It's a skill, yeah.
And it's not anything. I think anything is a skill. Understanding emotions, learning to communicate, all these different things are skills. And I think the sooner we can learn it, especially if we're younger, the better it's going to equip us. It doesn't mean that we're going to sail through these situations with ease and overcome our grief with ease, but it does mean that we have more of an understanding, more tools, more, the ability to communicate, as I say. And I think there's probably a shift in our culture, maybe not a massive shift. It's not going to change everything, but I do notice a shift. I think about my dad in particular, a very stoical man. When Natalie died, he'd struggle. If he accidentally said her name, let's say, you called somebody the wrong name, he would kind of go inside himself and, just felt like he'd said the wrong thing and offended someone or whatever. And just not knowing how to deal with that. I think it's very, very complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated, yeah.
But I think, the fact that you can remain as a unit as well. I know you said you've kind of gone in different directions, but ultimately, you're still there for one another, as you say.
I speak to my sisters probably every day, every other day. I'm incredibly proud of what they've achieved in their lives. And it's been an honour for me to try and fill a bit of the gap that my mum left behind. And they have a great relationship with my dad. And he's been on his own journey, still on his own journey, I think. But, we just try and live our lives in a way that would honour mum. Yeah. But also try and not live our lives sort of tied down by grief. Yeah. And I think it's important to make that distinction because, you want to be able to tell your children about what a wonderful person she was. It's devastating she will never meet them, but they'll certainly know about her and the effect she had on us. And you find yourself as you get older, even with your own children or other people, you kind of have those morals that your parents bestowed on you, and you pass them on to others. And I think that's the best way of keeping their memory alive, really. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, doing things in a way that they'd be proud of, I think, as well. And I've no doubt that she is proud of you and all that you've done and the family that you've raised as well. Yeah. Has your perspective on life and death changed since this has all happened?
Yeah. I think to begin with, you question mortality straight away. I was 25 years of age. Mum was 53. You don't expect to be in that situation. Then you start to think about, life is very fragile. Yeah. But also you could spend every day worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow. But actually you don't know. So why worry about it? Yeah. And those are words I never thought I'd ever utter. But it's true. So it's important, to have a plan for your life, I think, because structure helps people, certain people. It certainly helps me. But I don't overthink things as much as I used to do. I just kind of go with the flow a little bit more, try and enjoy the time that you have, and because you never know when that's going to change, right? It took me a long time to get over things like worrying about when things would go wrong, because then if things were going well, you'd think, well, this isn't going to last forever. Yeah. Something's going to happen. Yeah. But again, I think that's a trauma response, because you're not used to it. You've been in a bubble for so long, feeling like you feel. So now I just try and enjoy life as much as I can, do the things that make me happy, be a good human being. And I think that's what you can do.
Yeah. Or I heard it, maybe they didn't say it to me, but I heard it maybe at some point that they said if you're worrying about what potentially could happen, you ultimately have to live through it twice. And if it never happens, you're living through it for no reason, you know. And I think that shifted things for me. Not saying I definitely don't worry about a lot of things all of the time.
We all do.
But I think it gives you perspective that when you are worrying to just check back in and go, well, that actually might not happen. And then you can manage the thoughts a little bit better. If you were to give people who, like myself and other people who have had lost somebody due to a brain hemorrhage, some advice on how to navigate this journey, maybe they're a lot earlier in their journey than we both are, what would you say to them?
I think first of all is don't put a timeline on it and don't put pressure on yourself, you know, to think, right, well, next week I should feel okay, or the week after, or I'm not feeling okay, because there isn't any timeline for grief, particularly with something, I think, like a brain hemorrhage where it's so shocking. You know, it's difficult to process. So some people might find educating themselves on the reasons why, and this is why NKMT is so fantastic, you know, to be able to reach out and speak to people and understand a community of people that have experienced these things can really help. But also then you need to be able to step away from that and start to process things for yourself as well. So that's one thing. And I think having little goals in your life, whether it's today I'm going to get up and I'm going to leave the house, I'm going to go to the shop, which sounds insignificant to a lot of people. But when you're that deep into grief, it's very, very hard to do those very basic
Just getting
things,
dressed.
like just getting dressed. And it's true. Write those down and then hold yourself accountable to them. You know, right, today I'm going to get dressed. I'm not going to spend all day in pajamas, or I'm going to go to the shop. And actually you can start to build on those things, and then the haze will start to lift. I'm not saying it'll happen straight away, but it will help. And time, it is a cliche, but time does genuinely heal. You never think you'll get past something like that, but you do. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person, or that you don't love the person that you've lost, or recognise that loss in your life. You absolutely do. If anything, you know, the way I look at it is they wouldn't want you to live like this, you know, because they didn't when they were here. So why would they when they were gone?
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to slightly challenge or expand on what you're saying there, in a sense of, I think so often people say like time heals, and I do agree with that. But I also think, and I think this is probably less from my side, is that I think in order for you to heal over that time, you also need to be doing those things that you've mentioned today. You know, that toolbox we've spoken about. If you just sit around in your pajamas through that time, nothing's going to change. So there is this combination of being proactive and doing those things plus time equals hopefully moving forward from it. You know, it's not click your fingers, do one thing and everything changes. But I agree to that. The point is, but you consistently do them over time, and it will really help. I think it's important to clarify that for people, because I think so often a lot of people go, give yourself time. And they kind of mean like, just sit around, you know, and I think we have to also be proactive in our own healing as well.
And that's hard to take control back, but it also can be quite empowering when you do. You know, because then you feel like you're driving what happens next, rather than the emotion and feeling that you have doing that for you. And it does take a little bit of time, and it does take effort as well. You do have to want to do it and sort of reflect on what's happened, but also reflect on what you want to do next as well.
So reflecting on everything that's happened, how are you now?
I'm good, really good, happy. You know, happily married to wonderful children. You know, I'm lucky enough to have a good job, career, etc. I have my moments. Don't get me wrong. There's times in the year where I still struggle. Christmas, particularly. My mum's birthday is around Christmas, and it was always a time where, you know, everyone got together, which is not a surprise. It's Christmas, but Mum made a big fuss about Christmas. Regardless of what was going on in the family, it was always be a time that we come together and celebrate. So I really struggle with that. And little things, you know, you might see someone who looks like her on a train. And something brings you back, which is strange. It might sound strange, but that happens, you know, sometimes. You might just experience a high moment in your life and then think, I wish my mum was here to talk to her about it or to enjoy it. Like my sister's wedding or the birth of a new grandchild, as I touched on. They're moments where you have to pull yourself back a little bit, because you can then end up going back into that kind of grief cycle, as I call it. But I think I'm very grateful to now look back and say I had her in my life for as long as I did. I'd love to have had her now, and for all the years that I've missed it. But I'm very fortunate to have had a mum like her. So
yeah. We've got 3 questions that we ask all of our guests to close up the podcast. So the first one is for you, and I think we've already kind of covered this one, so I think I know the answer, but what is a non-negotiable for you in your routine, your health, that supports your health?
Running, definitely, or any form of exercise for me. But yeah, running's always been a part of my life in the recent, so yeah.
What's the next challenge?
I'm still thinking about it. I'm looking at maybe doing an ultra run of some form. There was one I wanted to do around Lake Windermere that sold out. So,
it's sold out.
Yeah, in a day. Yeah.
It's like It's like Oasis tickets, to be honest.
I managed to get them fortunately. But yeah, so it'll be something for next year. Obviously, be raising money for the charity as well, which is important.
That's very kind.
But yeah, something big. The marathon took a lot of me, to be honest.
Yeah.
As it does with everybody. But yeah, I want to do something bigger. So yeah, watch this space.
Yeah, great. We'll find out. Yeah, as I say, TBC. If you could get more people to understand one thing, what would it be?
About grief specifically, or anything.
Yeah.
I think that everybody is different, right? That sounds quite an obvious thing to say, but even when I was talking to my sisters, if you've got a family who's lost someone through a brain hemorrhage, one person might think one thing, the other person might not, just because you're related or you knew that person. I think it's about being patient with those individuals and letting them talk and listen. So I think grief is so individual and it's so personal. I think it's important just to recognise that for people.
Yeah, great. Do you have a motto for life? And if so, what is it?
There's probably a few little things. One that I resonated with quite a lot is it goes a little bit like one day or day one. I think it was The Rock that said that, actually. Yeah, which is not maybe a great philosopher,
yeah,
but it might not have been him that came up with it, but that's where I heard it. And for me, that's all about, you can put things off, but actually when you're going to start.
Yeah.
So I use that quite a lot. And I think there's times in your life where, pulling yourself back to just one place that you can remember being happy. And sometimes it's easy to fall away from that. So start a new day tomorrow and start to try and do those positive things in your life, and that can help.
Great. We also wanted to close the episode today we normally close it with the questions, but what we're going to do is you have a poem that your sister wrote, and you're going to share that with us.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say thank you very much now, and we'll close with the poem. So thank you very much for coming on today and for sharing all that you have done. And I think it'll be really important and powerful for millions of people who are, suffering in the way that you have suffered through losing someone to a brain hemorrhage. So hopefully, if it's helped one person or however many people, then thank you.
No worries, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me on. Okay, this is a poem written by my sister, Rebecca Fletcher. Fluorescent lights and closed doors, but no doctor's whites, just a few worn chairs and sterile walls. It's not like in films or books, no eddying suspense which warns of things, no knowing glances or predictable looks. There's just the pressing weight of the real and the not, and you wishing so hard it would stop. Pause the moment as you try to reshape and hone into something resembling a happier plot. Poorly, unlikely, sorry. The single words which break through the fog of your denial, so thick with confusion, surely this is all an illusion, that just to breathe becomes the most trying of trials. More words seep through like bleed and scans, and on some level you're aware of plans being made and decisions weighed, so many questions for what we should do. But in reality, you're vacant and so numb, slowly blinking and knowing you've not clearly heard a single word since the first ones that mattered, as they said, your mum. The speed of the thing and your reaction, it was so quick, so fast, and now you're lost and you're broken, collapsed in a pattern of closing your eyes just to imagine hers have awoken. The building and breaking pressure growing harder at your chest, worse even when they mistake you for dealing so well just because you're washed and you're dressed. It's not until later, days, months and years, that you understand more fully the strength that is. Flash forward those years and denial turns to grief, and grief to acceptance, a feeling you're not sure you'll feel with peace or reluctance. You're happy but worry as memories grow thick that you're losing the pain that keeps it all real, that stops all the memories becoming nostalgic. So take yourself back to the walls and the lights, trying to capture the rawness, the realness that feels right. Because without that, you sense she could disappear to a dream, so you fight with everything to hold it tight. 13 years and a habit of returning to a place that hasn't quite been replaced by something more worthy of her purpose and grace. I'm still panicked by misremembering her laugh and her voice as the sound echoes briefly but won't linger by choice. But what's most jarring yet irrevocably healing is the forgotten sense of that vacancy of feeling, so empty out and numb. There's no replication, no way to force imitation. Instead, it's filled up by the knowing of how her memory's never going, and now I get that I am a mum. Thank you.
That was such a powerful and moving episode, and I'm so immensely grateful to Miles for sharing his journey, what happened to his mum and how he coped with the grief thereafter. And I know that there were a number of very helpful tips in there that hopefully will help you too if you have lost somebody to a brain hemorrhage. It is never easy. I can say that from personal experiences as well. But I do hope that this episode has helped you even just the tiniest amount to navigate your grief. If you would like any more information about potentially navigating grief, or any more information about brain hemorrhages themselves, please do head to our website, www.nataliekatemoss.co.uk, where you can find more information about all of that. And the link to that website is also in our show notes too. This podcast is here to educate and to create awareness around brain hemorrhages so that there are fewer and fewer people in the world who are navigating traumatic loss as a result of a brain hemorrhage. And we hope through this podcast and through all the work that we're doing through the Natalie Kate Moss that we are decreasing those numbers of people mourning their loved ones from a brain hemorrhage. So please do continue to listen. Please do share this episode if you think it might potentially help someone you know. But in the meantime, please help us to prevent the preventable.